is going to be featured in this film. This crowdfunded film. By the way, this film is now the biggest documentary crowdfunded film in history. That will show all of these elements around the issue of UFOs and ETs and new energy systems. And I actually do have an announcement to make about that. I'd like to invite you, Steve Alten, and others to come to the premiere. It is going to be on Earth Day this year, April 22nd, in Los Angeles at LA Live. And you can go to SiriusDisclosure.com, that's SIRIUS disclosure.com, and sign up for that. The theater, well, they say it's the biggest venue for premieres in LA, but it only holds 809 people. So we suspect it's going to be oversold. So we may do we're looking into doing a live streaming event also. We're going to have some really great celebrities there and other folks. So, but if you'd like to come to the premiere, and Steve, if you'd like to come, you can come as my guest.
I'd be honored. And one of the things that I think is so intelligent about what you're doing is that, that with the financial crisis, they coined a phrase, too big to fail.
Yeah, right.
But with this, I think you have to become too big to be ignored.
Correct.
And you're doing it. You're doing it logically. You're doing it philanthropically. You're doing it in all the right ways. But just to get back to one of the things that you just mentioned about the ETs and the effects on nuclear, the danger to ourselves and the red flag for our planet. I was mentioning that I have the series Domain and one of the books, Resurrection. I just wanted to read you a passage from it because it fits in perfectly to what you're saying, and that is that futurists had defined three categories of evolution for human civilization. Type 1 civilizations are those that master all forms of our home world's energy resources. That includes everything from mining the oceans to tapping the planet's core to modifying the weather. A Type 1 civilization is mature enough to rise above petty conflicts of politics, race, religion, and culture to develop a unified planetary economy. While still susceptible to certain environmental and cosmic catastrophes, Type 1 civilizations have begun the process leading to the colonization of nearby planets. Now, the next step up the evolutionary ladder are Type 2 civilizations, which harness energy solely by way of their suns. They have colonized other planets. They have begun the exploration and possible colonization of nearby solar systems. Able to manipulate their environment, they will no longer be in danger of facing extinction by glaciation or asteroid impact, but will still be vulnerable to nearby supernovas whose eruptions could irradiate nearby planets. Love remains the greatest strength of Type 1 and Type 2 civilizations. Type 3 civilizations are the pinnacle of advanced societies. They have exhausted the energy output of their suns and must reach out to other star systems throughout the galaxy. Their starships approach the speed of light, perhaps even mastered Planck energy, which is the energy necessary to violate the very fabric of space and time. In other words, they can manipulate wormholes and things like that. Now, what we are as a species is a Type 0 civilization.
Right, exactly.
We're hopelessly divided. We're enamored in petty conflicts of equality, religion, and politics. Our technologies are focused on making war. We've nearly destroyed ourselves in the quest of ego and self. Type 0 civilizations are always prone to disasters, whether self-induced or, as our predecessors have learned, through the fury of Mother Nature. So the most dangerous place to be is where we are right now. We're a Type 0 civilization that has mastered enough technology to kill ourselves, but haven't yet gotten over the petty jealousies of not, instead of realizing that we really are one collective soul, that we still see differences in ourselves, and that's the most dangerous place to be. And I think that draws a bearing on the things that you do, because the extraterrestrials are only going to give us so much knowledge until we're mature enough to handle it. At the same time, they care about us enough not to see us to kill ourselves.
Right. I mean, they're very concerned about that, and I think there is. I mean, it sounds corny as sort of a prime directive that you intervene the minimum amount you can, hoping that the civilization learns from its errors and matures. The other thing is that it's not even a matter of the ETs providing us the technologies. I always tell people the laws of the universe are universal. So at a certain point, you reach this breakout, exponential development of technology and science, which is what we've been experiencing for the last 100 years. But it's not within the setting of a rational free market. This is a myth. If we had a rational free market, the work of Maxwell and Nikola Tesla would have been out 100 years ago, and we would have been off of the Standard Oil and Rockefeller oil matrix back around 1908. Now, that's an important date for people to remember, because that was when it had been proven that you could get energy from sources and run your farm or run your house without burning anything. And there's a picture with this farmer, Stubblefield, and Tesla by their farm, and then another picture with them up at the Capitol, where they actually have this so-called earth battery running. And so one of the things that we want to do, and I want to put this in as sort of a punchline to this whole story, is to recover the last 100 years. You know, everyone's very enamored of the fact that we have iPhones and smartphones and computers, and yet they're all running off a fossil fuel power grid, or worse, a nuclear power plant like Fukushima, that when they go bad, they go badly very quickly. And so the issue becomes the suppression, because of the greed factor and the lust for power that certain cartels have always had on Earth, has caused an aberration in our natural development and evolution as a species, where 100 years ago we would have eliminated poverty and could become peaceful and not been fighting over resources and land and what have you, because we would have tapped into this Dirac Sea, as Dr. Dirac called it, or the Higgs field, as it's called today, or the field of infinite energy, as Tesla called it. And there were electromagnetic geniuses going back to the late 1800s who did this, but the folks who have discovered it keep going through the buzzsaw of these large special interests that have corrupted government in the military-industrial complex and have suppressed it. So this is one of the themes of disclosure is, and I know that this is going all the way back to when I briefed the first CIA director about this, or Clinton's first CIA director about it, and, you know, we're sitting there, and the cover story was a dinner party. But in reality, I was brought up to Washington to brief the sitting CIA director who, along with the President Clinton and his group, his staff, had inquired about this UFO issue and had been brushed off. And they were really pissed, frankly. I mean, they were upset, obviously, and but scared, more importantly. And I remember this Woolsey, the CIA director, going, well, why aren't they talking to us about this? I said, because they don't trust you with the information. They think that you're going to, once you realize this is real, and what's behind the secrecy. He said, well, what's behind the secrecy? I said, we haven't needed oil or gas or coal or nuclear power or even surface transportation between our cities since the 1950s or before. And I said, that has been kept secret because they don't want to upset the multi-$100 trillion petrodollar system and oil and gas and coal system and electric grid. Because when you're talking about these kinds of technology, it's a whole new world. And unfortunately, you know, this is the thing that we, you know, I'm in Washington today, by the way, and I'm sitting at my place looking out over the White House, and I think this is the thing that policymakers and politicians never get around this issue. You know, they think it's just silliness, but really at the heart of it, the reason the CIA has worked so hard to put out so much silly information on this subject is because in reality it's really serious, pun intended. It's a very serious subject because it has to do with how we're living on the earth, and the fact is that there are brilliant scientists that I know. I know one of the top scientists here at the Naval Research Labs, where they have actually done this in their laboratory, faster than the speed of light communication, lifter systems that don't use any kind of conventional propulsion to have things float across their hangar, et cetera, and so on. Well, why then are we still filling up our cars with, Exxon fuel? And this is a very serious issue, and it has to do with not only our future, but how we're going to come together now as a people and say, you know, it's enough of this nonsense. We need to understand the foundation of the secrecy. And the only way to, I hate to say this, overthrow it is it's a peaceful revolution where the people come together and say, we're not going to do this anymore. So, 100% of the proceeds of this film, Sirius, by the way, are going to go into a new energy laboratory fund so we can build scientists that I've identified over the last 20 years can safely work on these systems and bring them out fairly quickly to the public, because I don't think it's going to come out through Lockheed Martin or the National Security Agency. It's going to come out through an effort from the people, and that's kind of the average person needs to understand that this is something that they can do that will really make a difference.
Well, I hope, I don't know if you've worked at all or come across Jesse Ventura, but...
Oh, yes, in fact, his producer, Michael Braverman, and I are friends, yes.
Because, you know, he has a voice and a political stance that would be conducive to the things that you've just mentioned, because I think unless we become with a multi-party system and get away from the two-party system, there's no room for new ideas like this. You know, I wrote a book called The Shell Game, which is about the end of oil and the next 9/11 event, and which, you know, not coincidentally, the Disclosure Project was, you know, preceded September 11th. You know, and a lot of it has to do with peak oil and the fact that oil reserves, world oil reserves, have peaked. They peaked in 2005, which means we're on the downward slope of a bell-shaped curve, and we are running out of oil. And unfortunately, our politics, you know, our politicians' solutions to those things have been to invade Iraq and invade Afghanistan, and to try to manipulate the pieces on the chessboard for the final last world oil reserves, which are all, you know, unfortunately in the Middle East. You know, and it's energy has created not just policy in this country, but poverty and war and death, because you know, we're still chasing fossil fuels.
Well, yes, and of course, I mean, many people even in the industry call it the black curse, that wherever there's a country that has large oil reserves, they almost always become fascistic dictators, just like Saudi Arabia and Nigeria, and very dysfunctional. And it's because of the way the system is run by folks who run roughshod over the mineral resources of various countries in order to make enormous profits on them. And I'll add another thing. The strategy of going into Iraq wasn't to get the oil, and there are very few people who know what I'm about to share with you. It was to tie it up. So oil would go from $35 a barrel to $150 a barrel, because they were about to lift sanctions on Saddam Hussein, who was no angel by any means. But if they had lifted those sanctions right before we invaded Iraq, they were considering doing that. Russia was, France, the Security Council. And if they hadn't hoaxed all these weapons that he allegedly had that he didn't have, where we could justify that invasion, oil would have gone back down to the Clinton era realm, where at some points it hit $12 and $18 a barrel. Instead, they went in there, made a mess of the situation, tied up the oil reserves, destroyed the infrastructure, which to this day isn't functioning properly, and therefore created this metered release of oil so that the price of oil can be staying up at around $100 a barrel instead of $20. So people have to understand that there are folks who have vast amount, you know, and I was talking to an investment banker, and she was talking about, oh, well, you know, I've done $4 billion deals. I said, no. We're talking $600 trillion. Forget about your $4 billion deal. You're talking about folks who have such enormous wealth and power. This is how they're playing this on a chess game. And so that $1 trillion Iraq disaster was really about creating enough chaos in the world that second largest oil field on Earth would get so dysfunctionally tied up in the war that prices would skyrocket. And of course, Carlyle Group and the Saudi oil, which they're pumping out of the ground at about $2 a barrel or less, gee, what a great profit margin there. But you know, meanwhile, the atmosphere. And I think this is less about how much oil there is in the world, because I understand there's classified studies that show there's a lot more than people think and hard to reach places. The big issue is, look how much damage you do to get them. Look what's going on in Canada with the tar sands. And it's very dirty oil. And so the question becomes, when we have these other solutions, why are we putting trillions and trillions of dollars into those efforts? Or even why is our